Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading Tirzah, and this is the last chapter. And it's not very long. It's called A Song of Hope. And do you think they're going to make it to Canaan in this chapter, is my question. Kadesh was a good place for the camp. Tirzah knelt by a little spring and splashed its cold, clear water on her face, then her arms. Sitting back on her heels, she listened to its burbling rush around the stones sticking above the water. The sound of running water was a good sound, one she would never forget. Her own water skin was full, and Ephon was nearly finished filling hers. "Ephon, are you ever afraid?" Tirzah suddenly asked. Do you think we will have to fight the Canaanites the way we had to fight the Amalekites? Moses said that Yahweh will drive out the people of the land before us. I know he will, but Ram says we must fight too. Tirzah sat still, thinking of the last war, the only war she'd ever been in so far. Ephon lifted her water skin, her broad face thoughtful. Maybe both Ram and Moses are right. Yahweh alone fought the Egyptians for us, she said. I know, Tirzah interrupted, but we fought the Amalekites. Hastily she added, and Yahweh gave us victory, if that's what you mean. As they walked, Ephon said in a gentle voice, "You asked me if I ever feel afraid. Sometimes at night I think about what could happen. Another raid, or worse, a mutiny in the camp. That scares me more." She sighed. Some people turning away from following Yahweh over the least hard thing. I'm not very brave, but one lesson I learned from my father: stick to the job, whatever it is. I can't help it, I just plod ahead. The hard jobs sometimes turn out to be the ones that make you feel best about yourself when the thing's done. What Ephon said made sense, and Tirzah nodded. You're strong, Ephon. I just want to get to the promised land as fast as we can. The path narrowed, forcing them to go single file past an outcrop of rocks on either side. Well, it can't be too much longer, Tiz, Ephon said. The men Moses sent to spy out the land should be coming back soon. Tirzah balanced her water skin carefully until she was on flat ground once more. My father is anxious for Uncle Caleb to come back with news. The men had been gone for almost a month. No one knew if they were safe or not. She was proud that her favorite uncle was one of the 12 chosen to spy out the land of Canaan. But why weren't they back? People were beginning to worry. Aloud she said, when there's a job to do, Uncle Caleb's like your father. He just keeps on till it's done. At least she hoped so. Tirzah and Ephon were hardly back when the news came. They've come! They've come! The shout rang through the camp from every direction. People dropped what they were doing and ran. The men had returned. Tirzah snatched a glimpse of her uncle among them as they passed. Like the rest, his clothes were stained, his face dirty and tired. Before she could wave, they were swallowed up in a rush of people. At the tent of meeting, the crowds waited for word. Tirzah stood with her mother next to Jerioth and her family to hear the news passed from tribe to tribe. The report began well. A good land flowing with milk and honey, the word came down. You should see the size of the grapes, big and sweet, like these we brought to show you. The pomegranates, too, wonderful. Good soil, well watered. Tirzah was almost dizzy with joy. But what was this they were saying now? Walled cities and people so large they make us look like grasshoppers. Descendants of the Anak, a race of giants, Amalekites living there as well. The people are too strong for us. Young Joshua stood by her uncle, adding his plea to Caleb's. It was useless. Not one of the other 10 spies agreed with them. The decision of the others was firm. We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. Women tore their clothes. Men shook their fists at Moses and Aaron. Some wailed and others shouted in anger. The crowds were getting out of hand. In the confusion, Jerahiel pushed and elbowed to drag his family to safety. For an instant, Tirzah lost sight of her father. Then Ram was pulling her by the arm out of the crush of the crowd. Panic made her heart beat faster as Ram led her through the chaos. Free of the crowds at last, they reached the tents safely. Then her father returned with Ram and Malid to help Caleb. It was a day like none Tirzah had seen since their flight from the Egyptian army. In the tent, her mother lay on the ground weeping and moaning. Baby Deborah, worn out with crying, slept in her bed. For once, Jerioth, the beautiful, cheerful Jerioth, could comfort no one. She, too, lay face down upon the ground in her tent, weeping quietly. There was no one to turn to. Tirzah's legs felt weak, her whole body numb. She sat down in the tent doorway where she could see and wait. What she was waiting for, she didn't know. After a while, she thought to look up and see if Yahweh's cloud was still above the tabernacle. It was. Yahweh was still with them. Yahweh is giving us the promised land, she thought. He can do it. Uncle Caleb and Joshua said so too. Her mother's sobs came from the tent periodically, and finally Tirzah rose and went to her. It will be all right, Mother, she crooned. Listen, Uncle Caleb knows. Her mother made no response, her face still buried in her arms. In her corner of the tent, baby Deborah slept peacefully. Mother, remember the song of Moses? Tirzah began to hum it, then to sing, horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. Her mother lifted her head at last, her large eyes full of sorrow. Not this time, little bird. Yahweh is angry with us for our sins, she said haltingly. With a sudden rush of fear, she clutched Tirzah to her fiercely. I cannot bear to see you die, she wailed. When her mother's grip loosened a little, Tirzah pleaded with her, rocking with her like a child. Mother, Mother, I'm not going to die. Yahweh is still with us. Have you forgotten the cloud? Come and see it, Mother, please. Leah only covered her eyes, shaking her head. No, little one, not this time. Don't you see? Many have died under Yahweh's cloud. He is angry with us, angry with us. Tirzah could get nowhere with her mother. By evening, the crowds who had listened all day to the words of the 10 men were ready to stone Moses. We want a new leader, one cried, and the refrain was picked up and repeated. Others shouted for a return to Egypt. The Canaanites will take our wives and our children, someone screamed. The entire camp was assembled to listen and decide what to do. Tirzah stood once more by her trembling mother, who leaned heavily against Jerahiel. Moses and Aaron lay on their faces before the people. Once more, Caleb and Joshua tried to appeal to the crowds. Do not rebel against the Lord, her uncle was crying out. If Yahweh is pleased with us, he will give us this land. Do not be afraid of the people. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Tirzah wanted to cheer her uncle's words, shout Yahweh's name, but muttering crowds frightened her, and her voice barely whispered, the Lord is with us. People are picking up stones, Ram said. They'll stone Moses and Arab, Caleb and Joshua. No, he shouted. Almost at the same time, the cloud of glory seemed to swell with a burning fire at the tent of meeting. Someone cried, Look, look, Yahweh's glory. The crowd hushed to silence, so thick Tirzah could feel it. She trembled as if with fever. Would Yahweh's anger strike them all? Moses entered the tabernacle while the people stood waiting. It seemed to Tirzah the most awful moment of her life. Every eye turned toward him when he reappeared. With halting steps, Moses walked from the tabernacle to face the people. Tears streamed down his face as he brought them Yahweh's words. Tirzah felt her own heart breaking. Yahweh's love and mercy are great, Moses began in a choked voice that grew stronger as he continued. He forgives sin and rebellion, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. From bowed head to bowed head, a sigh rose like one breath above the people. Only Caleb and Joshua, Moses went on, and the children you said would be taken as plunder will enter the promised land. A murmur like a great gasp broke from the listeners. Wait, Moses cried out, there is more. Only those under the age of 20 will enter the land, but you and your children shall wander as shepherds in the desert for 40 years, until only the children remain, and then they shall enter the land. In a stillness as deathly as that of a mass funeral, the people went quietly to their tents. No one argued, no one protested, no one spoke to a neighbor. They lit no fire that night, but sat in a little family group. Her father, her mother, Ram, Oren, small Deborah, Abishur and herself. Tirzah could not speak for grief. With a burning lump in her throat, she listened to her father. Tears rolled down his face as he prayed. When he was through, he held his wife's hand in his own large one. My children, he said, though we shall never see the good land Yahweh has promised, you will. He paused for strength and went on. Your mother and I will prepare you for the day that will come when you shall enter the land. You will take our places, be our eyes, our ears. Your joy will be for us too. Tirzah could hardly bear the pain in her heart as he continued. We shall teach you all that we can, my dear ones, for as long as Yahweh wills. Remember, my dear, he patted his wife's crying shoulder. We are forgiven. Yahweh's love is great and his decree is just. He will care for us all our days here in the desert. Always we can look up and see his cloud of glory with us. Her mother nodded, unable to speak. And though we die here in the desert, our lives can be good ones, eh? He lifted his hands high for a silent moment. From somewhere, the words of the Song of Moses made their way to Tirzah's lips. Sing to the Lord, for he has risen up in triumph. Horse and rider he has hurled into the sea, she whispered. Abishur began to play his flute, and backed by the music, Tirzah's voice grew stronger. One by one, the others joined them, singing with voices still heavy with pain, but behind the pain, hope. And that's the end. Hope you've enjoyed this book and learned a little bit. I did, and I shared it with my Bible study class, some of the things I learned. But anyway, see you next time. Bye-bye.